Okay, today we're going to talk about this fifth week. We're one third of the way through the semester, as shocking as that is. We're going to tackle chapter 5 today, hormones and the brain. Kind of like Pinky in the Brain, except hormones in the brain. Well, not like Pinky in the Brain at all, is it? So this is chapter 5. We're going to talk about hormones. Animals use several types of chemical signals in the body to communicate or deliver information. Neurocrine are synaptic communications, nerve, crine communication. Autocrine, hormone activating the releasing glands. Auto meaning self. Paracrine, a hormone targeting nearby cells. Para means around. Parachute means a shoot around you. Para means around. Endocrine, hormone passing through the blood to distant target. Endo means inside. And pheromone, communication between individuals. And I don't know the derivation of pheromone. Neurocrine communication is synaptic communication. This communication is highly localized, as you can see. Neurocrine, so every synapse is a neurocrine communication. Autocrine function, in an autocrine cell, the secreted hormone is released by the cell and then finds receptors on their own cell to attach to, and that is autocrine, or self-communicating. Paracrine cells, it would be like, it would be like you talking to yourself, trying to get yourself to do something. That would be autocrine. Paracrine cells release a chemical communicator that affects a nearby target cell. The strongest impacts are to nearby cells, and that's a paracrine cell. That's the way the pancreas works. And we're going to find out about this later. The pancreas works. So it will release hormones, and it will affect another part of the pancreas. It will tell another part of the pancreas to do something. Endocrine communication is through the release of a hormone into the bloodstream. The blood takes the hormone signal to distant targeted organs where the hormone changes the function of the targeted organ. And a good example would be the pituitary gland telling your thyroid using TSH, telling thyroid stimulating hormone, telling your thyroid to produce T4 and T3, T4, and T7. Hormones released into the environment are carried from their originator to another individual of the same species. Human females may release pheromones that regulate their menstrual cycles. They've done studies with this. A lot of humans claim that we do not produce pheromones, but we do have the organism, the organ in our noses to detect pheromones, or at least some of us do, as strange as that is. There are people that actually react to pheromones. There are other people that don't seem to put off pheromones, as interesting as that is. So this may be one of those deals where some people have evolved so that they don't have pheromones, and other humans have evolved that do have pheromones. This is really kind of fascinating, and it's kind of controversial because a lot of humans like to think of themselves as higher beings than other animals. Of course, dogs and cats and horses and cows, sheep. All of these animals put off pheromones, and that's how the male knows that the female is receptive to reproduction. And the question is, do humans do this or not? And the answer is, well, maybe some humans do, and some humans actually don't. Some groups. One of the things that, and like I said, this is very controversial, but in areas where people have been isolated and they have had arranged marriages for an extended length of time, those individuals don't seem to put off pheromones. But in places where this hasn't taken place, then those individuals seem to put off pheromones. Is it universal? Obviously, it's not. Not everybody has the vomeronasal organ in their nose, but some people do. As a European, I do have it, and I have reacted to pheromones before. But you know, as American Indians, or at least some tribes, have been used arranged marriages, then possibly American Indians don't. So, you know, I start talking about all these things, and you think you're nuts. You're nuts because this doesn't exist. And the reality is, it may not exist for you, but it certainly exists for me. I'm well aware of it. Allomones function. Allomones are chemical signals that are released by one species and affect a member of another species. Flowers will release allomones to attract insects that will carry their pollen to another plant of their species, and those are known as allomones. Hormones frequently act in a gradual fashion. Behavioral and physical responses occur only after weeks of treatment and may last for several days. When hormones do alter behavior, they tend to act by changing the intensity or probability of a behavior. They do not act as a switch. The quantities and types of hormones released are influenced by environmental as well as internal factors. High levels of testosterone cause aggressive behavior. The most aggressive individual wins an encounter and maintains their testosterone level, while the loser suffers a lowering of testosterone after the encounter. Each hormone has multiple effects on different tissue, organs, and behavior. Conversely, a single type of behavior or physiological change can be affected by many different hormones. Hormones are produced in small amounts and are secreted in bursts. Pulsating patterns are sometimes crucial for the small amount of hormone to be effective. Levels of many hormones vary rhythmically throughout the day. Many hormonal systems are controlled by circadian clocks in the brain. Hormones affect the metabolic process in most cells and induce long-term metabolic change through the buildup and breakdown of carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Hormones interact. The effects of one hormone can be markedly changed by the actions of another hormone. The chemical structure of a given hormone is similar to all vertebrates. The functions served across species can vary. And this is one of the reasons why when we give growth hormones to cows, why they're afraid that it may be getting into humans. And that's one of the reasons why humans are getting bigger, because we're eating too much beef from growth-induced cows. Hormones can affect only cells that possess a receptor protein that recognizes the hormone and alters cell function. In different vertebrates, the same brain regions often possess the same hormone receptors. Neural communication works somewhat like an old wire telephone or telegraph system. Messages travel over fixed channels to precise destinations. The structure of the connections between neurons determines the transmission of information from one cell to another. And of course, that's not the way telephones work anymore. We don't really have landlines. We have, maybe we do. I don't, well, some places may have landlines. But in the old days, of course, that was the only way to communicate by telephone. And of course, telegraph, if the wire was cut or something happened, then your communication was stopped. Endocrine communication works like a television broadcasting system. Hormones are broadcast in the blood, and any number of scattered receptors throughout the body receive the message and respond to it. And of course, that's the way cell phones work as well. Neural messages are very rapid and are measured in milliseconds. Hormonal messages are slow and are measured in seconds or even minutes. Most neural messages are all or none responses. Hormonal messages are analog, graded in strength by the amount of hormone released. Neural responses are very often voluntary, while hormonal responses are not. Both systems store chemical transmitters for future release. Both systems are stimulated to respond by an outside source. Both systems are quite complex and maintain many different chemical transmitters. Some hormones used by the endocrine system are also produced by neurons and used as transmitters. Both systems are transmitters that have specific receptors on the receiving target cells that respond to the stimulation. Both systems may produce a second messenger response in the targeted cells that bring about two levels of changes at the same time. There are three categories of hormones: protein hormones, amine hormones, and steroid hormones. Protein hormones are composed of strings of amino acids. Amine hormones are composed of a single amino acid, and steroid hormones are composed of four interconnected rings of carbon atoms rather than amino acids. Hormones promote the proliferation, growth, and differentiation of cells. Thyroid hormones present at birth support brain development and growth, and this is one of the reasons why if a child is born with poor thyroid function, then their brain growth is reduced. And this used to be known as cretinism. The individual had an intellectual deficit, and it was referred to as cretinism. I guess we're not using that term anymore. But the reality is one of the things that we do as when a baby is born is that we check their thyroid function. If there's no question as to their thyroids be functioning properly, we will not check them. You have to draw blood in order to do it. But if there is a question of their thyroid function, then we will check their thyroid to make sure that it's functioning properly. Hormones modulate cell activity. Gonadal hormones modulate the onset and the maintenance of secondary sexual characteristics with puberty. And of course, that comes from the ovaries in the female and the testes in the male. Protein hormones and most amine hormones bind to receptor molecules on the surface of target cell membranes. This releases a second messenger in the cell. Because of the rapid process of protein binding, protein and amine hormones tend to act rapidly. Steroid hormones must pass through the cell membrane and bind to specific receptor proteins inside the cell. The combined steroid receptor complex then binds to the DNA inside the nucleus. The effects of gene expression may increase the production of some proteins and decrease others. And we're going to look at how the second messenger works right now. There we go.
Epinephrine is one of many hormones that is water-soluble, hydrophilic, and therefore unable to cross the hydrophobic plasma membranes of its target cells. Instead, it binds to receptor proteins located in the plasma membrane and does not enter the cell. When epinephrine binds to beta-adrenergic receptors on the liver cell, G proteins on the inner side of the cell membrane are activated. Each G protein is composed of 3 subunits, and the binding of epinephrine to its receptor protein causes one of the G protein subunits to dissociate from the other 2. The G protein subunit which dissociates from the others carries a GDP, which is replaced by GTP when the subunit is activated. The activated G protein subunit then diffuses within the plasma membrane until it encounters adenylyl cyclase, a membrane enzyme that is inactive until it interacts with the G protein subunit. When activated by the G protein subunit, adenylyl cyclase catalyzes the formation of CAMP from ATP. The CAMP formed at the inner surface of the membrane diffuses within the cytoplasm, where it binds to and activates protein kinase A, an enzyme that adds phosphate groups to specific cellular proteins. In liver cells, protein kinase A phosphorylates and thereby activates another enzyme called phosphorylase, which converts glycogen into glucose 6-phosphate. The glucose 6-phosphate is then converted to glucose. Through this multi-step mechanism, epinephrine causes the liver to secrete glucose into the blood during the fight or flight reaction.
You can see what a slow process all of this is. It's metabotrophic, and it's relatively slow. There we go. Most of the hormonal systems in the endocrine system control themselves through a negative feedback system. A gland detects a need to produce the hormone is produced, the need is taken care of, the gland is no longer stimulated by the need, the gland produces only enough hormone to take care of the level of the need. And that is the way it works. So that's a negative feedback system. Insulin's negative feedback loop, glucose from a meal enters the bloodstream. The increased glucose triggers the pancreas to produce more insulin. The insulin enables the cells of the body to utilize the glucose for energy. As the level of glucose in the blood decreases, the pancreas is stimulated to produce less and less insulin. A balance is maintained. The pituitary gland rests in a depression of the skull directly behind the nasal cavity. The pituitary gland consists of two parts, the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary, or the front and the back of the pituitary. The anterior pituitary is constructed of glandular tissue. The posterior pituitary is constructed of neural tissue. The pituitary gland is connected to the hypothalamus by a thin piece of tissue called the pituitary stalk. The axons of the hypothalamus reach into the pituitary gland, but only in the posterior pituitary. The axons from the supraoptic nucleus and the paraventricular nucleus of the hypothalamus stimulate the posterior pituitary gland to secrete oxytocin and arginine vasopressin. Oxytocin, of course, has to do with the mothering instinct. It allows the release of milk from the breasts. It also makes the individual want to take care of the child. Vasopressin has to do with it's an antidiuretic. It's the antidiuretic hormone. In other words, it regulates the fluids in your body. Because of the vascular structure of the posterior pituitary, both oxytocin and vasopressin are rapidly released into the bloodstream. Vasopressin is also known as antidiuretic hormone. This hormone helps conserve water by inhibiting the formation of urine in the kidneys. It is stimulated by areas in the supraoptic and paraventricular nucleuses that detect thirst and water needs. Oxytocin also is produced by the posterior pituitary. Oxytocin stimulates the contraction of the uterine wall that speeds up childbirth. Oxytocin also triggers the contraction of the cells in the mammary glands that allows the milk to be released from the breast. Because the process takes 30 to 60 seconds, the experienced mother will begin responding to her child's cries rather than the suckling on the breast. And for that reason, as soon as she hears him cry, then the oxytocin will be produced and she will start leaking milk from her breast. While oxytocin allows other animals to reproduce, in humans it mediates sexual arousal and affection response. The anterior pituitary is made up of glandular cells rather than neural cells as the posterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary is controlled by releasing hormones produced in the hypothalamus and are transported to the anterior pituitary through a network of capillaries called the hypothalamic pituitary portal system. The neuroendocrine cells of the hypothalamus that produce the releasing hormones are controlled by two influences. They receive neural impulses from other parts of the hypothalamus that either inhibit or excite their releasing capacity. Circulating messages from other hormones directly affect them. The corticotropin-releasing hormone, CRH, from the hypothalamus stimulates the pituitary gland to release adrenal corticotropic hormone, ACTH, that stimulates the adrenal glands to produce corticosteroids. Thyrotropin-releasing hormone, TRH, stimulates the pituitary gland to produce thyroid-stimulating hormone, or TSH, that stimulates the thyroid gland to release thyroid hormones. And we already talked about that. Prolactin-releasing peptide and prolactin-inhibiting factors are produced by the hypothalamus to control the amount of prolactin released from the pituitary gland. Prolactin controls lactation in women. Somatocrinin stimulates, and somatostatin inhibits are produced by the hypothalamus to stimulate the pituitary gland to produce growth hormone, which controls bone growth. Gonadotropin-releasing hormone is produced by the hypothalamus, which stimulates the pituitary gland to produce luteinizing hormone and follicle-stimulating hormone. In the female, luteinizing hormone stimulates the release of ova from the ovaries and prepares the uterine wall for implantation. Follicle-stimulating hormone stimulates secretion of estrogen and influences ova production. In the male, luteinizing hormone stimulates the testes to produce testosterone, and follicle-stimulating hormone influences sperm production. The adrenal glands are situated on the top of each kidney. Like the pituitary gland, the adrenal glands are divided into two portions, the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla. The adrenal medulla releases the amine hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine, in response to the sympathetic nervous system. The adrenal cortex produces and secretes some of the steroid hormones, the adrenal corticoids. The glucocorticoids affect the metabolism of carbohydrates. Cortisol is an example of a glucocorticoid. The second group of adrenal steroids is the mineralocorticoids, which affect the ion concentration of sodium in the kidneys. Aldosterone acts in the kidneys to reduce urine output and conserve sodium, thus also conserving water. The adrenal cortex also produces sex steroids. The chief sex steroid produced by the adrenal cortex is androstenedione, the steroid that Mark McGwire was using when he broke the Major League home run record. Androstenedione contributes to adult hair growth patterns in men and women, and overabundance in a woman can lead to a more masculine hair growth pattern. You guys don't remember Mark McGwire? That's okay. That was a long time ago. That was 98, 99. Him and Sammy Sosa were hitting home runs. And then a couple years later, Barry Bonds broke both records. Broke all the records. I think he has 72 or 73 home runs in a season. Mark McGwire had 66, I think. And that's what too much hair growth in women looks like. Masculine hair growth pattern. As you can see, they have excess facial hair. The adrenocortical hormones are controlled by ACTH released from the pituitary gland. Stress is detected by the hypothalamus, and it releases CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone, to induce the pituitary to release ACTH. Unfortunately, the glucocorticoids released because of the ACTH, when released in high levels, can kill nerve cells in the hippocampus. So this is ACTH. This is what we're talking about, ACTH. It's a stress hormone. So the more stress you have, you can actually destroy your memory, since it's killing nerve cells in your hippocampus where your memory takes place. So too much stress is not a good thing. It can really damage you. The thyroid gland is located around the esophagus, just below the voice box. Females don't have a prominent voice box, but males do. And it's what is that thing called? I can't think of what it's called. Uh, the three hormones that's secreted from the thyroid include thyroxine, T4, triiodithyronine, T3, and calcitonin, sometimes called T7. So you have T3, T4, and T7. The hormones are stored in the thyroid colloid. The thyroid maintains a large supply of hormone, about 100 days worth. Calcitonin promotes calcium use in the bones. T4 and T3 levels are regulated by TSH released by the anterior pituitary. T3 and T4 are amines, but act as steroids, passing through the cell membrane, finding a receptor in the cell, and then binding to the DNA. T3 and T4 are released from the thyroid gland because of the influence of TSH from the pituitary, which is induced to release TSH, then stimulated by thyrotropin-releasing hormone secreted by the hypothalamus. So if we thought you had a thyroid malfunction, one of the things we would check would be the TSH to see if you have too much or too little. The other thing we would do is check your T4 and T3, not especially your T3, but your T4. And if you had too much of each one, you would have a problem maintaining your body weight. It would be like you were hyperactive, like you had ADHD, if you had too much hormone. If you had too little, you would have a difficult time maintaining your body weight. In other words, you'd gain too much weight and you would be lethargic all the time. The thyroid hormones are critically dependent on iodine. An inadequate supply of iodine will lead to hypothyroidism. Since the thyroid output is inadequate, the pituitary produces more and more TSH to compensate, but only succeeds in enlarging the thyroid in a condition known as goiter. In the United States, this is combated with iodized salt. Now, the interesting thing about iodine, so why in the world would humans be sensitive to iodine? And the answer is because most humans evolved living around the ocean, and there's iodine in the ocean, in seafood. So if you eat seafood, you're okay. You've got enough iodine to take care of that. But when humans started moving inland and moved away from seafood, they didn't have enough iodine, and this was a really serious problem. So when people went into the interior of North America, when they went into the interior of Africa, goiter was very common, and this was a really serious problem. Until 1924, goiter was endemic in areas of the United States where iodine from seafood was not prevalent. In Michigan, a study in 1923 showed a 39% prevalence rate among school children. What are we talking about? We're talking about goiter. In Ohio, 31% of school children were estimated to have goiter. In West Virginia, goiter was rare as long as local brown salt was used. In other words, this was salt that had iodine in it. When pure white salt replaced the brown, a 1922 study showed 61% of the school children had enlarged thyroid glands. I talked to my mother about this. My mother was born in 1915, and they didn't come up with iodized salt until later, until a little bit later. And she was saying that this was very common in her school. She didn't have that problem because her grandfather was fairly wealthy, and he would have seafood from time to time. So his family was okay, but the other families in the neighborhood, of course, they couldn't get seafood. They suffered from goiter. As a fetus is developing, if the thyroid hormones are not high enough, they will cause stunted growth, facial malformations, and reduction in brain size. The baby will also suffer from intellectual disabilities in a condition known as cretinism. We didn't talk about salt. We need to talk about salt because that's how people that live in where I live, Iowa, keep from getting goiter. We need to get our iodine one way or the other. Iodine is really bitter. It's not like you want to take a drop of it every day. It'll stain your tongue brown. But Morton started iodizing salt in the early 1920s, and as long as you had iodized salts, you were okay. You wouldn't develop goiter. Now remember, um, your body maintains 100 days worth of the hormones, so there's a lot of area to play with here. But you need to consume iodized salt. If you don't consume iodized salts, you'll get goiter. So that's one of the things you need to think about when you're going to the store. Uh, you know, you don't have to buy iodized salt every time, but of course my mother did because she was really sensitive to this, to the fact that because she had so many people in her elementary school and high school that had goiter when she was growing up. As a fetus is, oh, we already talked about that. Did we? No. As a fetus is developing, if the thyroid hormones are not high enough, they will cause stunted growth, facial malformations, and a reduction in brain size. The baby will also suffer from intellectual disability in a condition known as cretinism, and I've already talked about that. One of the other things, if you look at a baby and the baby has an enlarged tongue, then this is an indication that the infant may have cretinism, may have a low thyroid level, have a malfunctioning thyroid. And this is one of the things that we look at. I used to work in the nursery, in the neonatal intensive care unit or in the nursery, and one of the things that we were looking for was this. We were looking for an enlarged tongue, and if we saw an enlarged tongue, then we would draw a thyroid function on the child, and we would start treating them for thyroid malfunction. We'd start giving them something. I'm not really sure how that worked. I was just the guy that drew the blood. And I was sometimes the guy that recognized the fact that the babies were having problems. Sometimes when you see babies over and over again, you don't think about it. But somebody coming into the nursery and looking at or for something may see it. The male gonads are the two testes located in a sac beneath the penis. Each testis produces millions of sperm a day through serotoli cells. In and among the serotoli cells are Leydig cells which secrete testosterone. And of course, they're pointing to this diagram is pointing to the Leydig cells. Testosterone and other androgens are regulated by luteinizing hormone from the pituitary gland. Luteinizing hormone is controlled by the release of gonadotropin-releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. The female gonads are the ovaries. They are located above the vagina at the very bottom of the abdominal cavity. There are two ovaries, one on each side of the uterus. The ovaries produce progestins and estrogens. The most important estrogen is estradiol. The primary progestin is progesterone. Estrogens trigger the production of progestin receptors in the brain. Hence, with puberty, progestin sensitivity ushers in the menstrual cycle after estrogen is secreted from the ovaries. All three sex hormones, androgens, estrogens, and progestins, have a similar chemical structure. They are four interconnected carbon rings. The sex hormones, along with the adrenal steroids, are derived from cholesterol. Estrogens are synthesized from androgens, and androgens are synthesized from progestins. Both males and females have the same sex hormones, only in different proportions. So it is just those proportions that make you a boy or a girl, a male or a female. Now, the interesting thing is we're talking about four interconnected carbon rings. If you take steroids, and of course steroids are artificial androgens, if you take steroids, the body will stop producing androgens. And this is one of the reasons why when a male takes steroids, that his sexual parts will be reduced because he's not producing his own testosterone to support the growth of his or the maintenance of his sexual parts, his testicles, and his testicles and penis will shrink. If a female takes androgens to maintain muscle mass or to gain more muscle mass, then she'll start looking more masculine because it will change the proportions of the hormones in her body. And she'll start looking more masculine. Unlike most brain structures which are paired, there is only one pineal gland. It lays on the top of the brainstem. The pineal gland produces the amine hormone melatonin. Melatonin receptors are metabotropic. Thus, they activate G proteins. And of course, it's a relatively slow process. Since melatonin activates metabotropic receptors, reaction to it is slow. Melatonin regulates the circadian rhythm and the reaction to light and dark. Melatonin can be used to move the sleep cycle up in the night, but because it has a metabotropic receptor, it only works over time. The pancreas serves two main functions. It produces digestive enzymes, and as an endocrine gland, it secretes insulin and glucagon. The endocrine gland portion of the pancreas is a series of specialized cells called islets of Langerhans. So one of the problems, alcohol is really fairly destructive. It's fairly toxic. Sometimes individuals who drink alcohol will get what they call pancreatitis. Pancreatitis is an inflammation in your pancreas. Now, this is not a good thing because if you get an inflammation in your pancreas, it may abscess. If it abscess, you've got all these digestive juices leaking throughout your body, and of course, it starts eating away at your innards. This is no joke. This is not a lot of fun. I've seen this several times with individuals. People rarely survive pancreatitis because they can't stop the enzymatic process. And of course, you wouldn't want to. That's how you digest your food, with all of these secreting digestive enzymes is how you digest your food. But with pancreatitis, of course, unless they can slow down the process or stop the process, then it will actually eat away at your guts. This is really kind of interesting. We had a guy that normally when I was in the service, if we sent a guy to Wilford Hall, they never came back. And the reason they never came back is because the only reason we sent him down there was because they were fairly terminal. But we sent this one guy down that he was an alcoholic and he had developed pancreatitis. And so we sent him down there to die. But he changed. He changed completely. He started exercising, and he stopped the pancreatitis. It reversed itself, and he started growing his pancreas back. Well, not really growing it back, but what was there started functioning better. And he became a runner, and we would see him running all over base, which really made us all happy because, well, normally when we sent somebody to Wilford Hall, they never came back, and he actually came back, which was a good thing. And he was a good NCO, and he had corrected the problem that he had, which was his alcoholism, of course. He'd be running all over base. He usually ran without a shirt on because this is Lubbock, Texas, and it was really hot in the summertime, hot and dry. So he'd run around without his shirt on, and he had this nasty scar where his pancreas was, which is right under your rib cage. So it was pretty interesting watching him run around. And of course, somebody that didn't understand what was going on would look at him and go, "Ooh, he's got a scar." But those of us who knew what was going on kind of smiled whenever we saw this guy with his scar, because we knew that he saved his own life by exercising. Both glucagon and insulin affect glucose utilization by the body's cells. The peptide hormone insulin is produced in beta cells within the islets of Langerhans, while glucagon is produced in alpha cells of the islets. And as you can see, the beta cells, you can see the beta cells. There's also delta cells in there. When glucose rises to a select point, insulin is released into the bloodstream. The insulin induces the cells to use more glucose and reduces the amount of glucose being released by the liver, lowering the blood sugar level. And this is how the body regulates your sugar level. So you eat, a piece of cake, and maybe you eat a second piece of cake, and you've just infused your body with all of this glucose. How in the world does your body keep from going crazy? And the answer is insulin and glucagon. Glucagon serves the opposite purpose of insulin. When the pancreas detects a low blood sugar level, glucagon is released and it induces the liver to release glycogen. There is a paracrine action between the alpha and the beta cells of the islets of Langerhans. And that is the end of our chapter, as interesting as that was. So let me talk about pancreatitis just a little bit. This worked for him. And I can't promise you that anybody else who takes up running when they have pancreatitis will reverse the process. It worked for him, and we were really happy about it. And of course, he was relatively young. He was in his late 20s, early 30s. When he developed his pancreatitis. So he had been a runner before he became a drunk. So it was a little bit easy for him. And well, anyway. So I'll talk to you guys next week. I don't know what we'll tackle. Probably chapter 6 next week.